Did Harvard's president plagiarize her resignation letter? We'll explore that coming up. Hey there. Welcome to the Vince Coglianese Show. Good to have you with us today. Joining us on the program, Joe Pinion will be here. He ran against Chuck Schumer. He's got some thoughts on the plight that black Americans face under Joe Biden and company. That's coming up at 3:30. 4:30, Alana Goodman is here from the Washington Free Beacon as we explore the release this week of all of those Epstein documents, Jeffrey Epstein. Bill Clinton's name is there a lot. Alana will talk to us about that. Tony Shaffer is here at 5 o'clock as another hoax about the American military has been exposed. The left never stops. And Philip Lenjicki joins us at 5:30 as Biden keeps on ushering illegal Chinese migrants, aliens, into the United States. And his new system for doing it, well, it's downright shocking. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. So great to be back with you here on WMAL. Thank you for giving me the chance to take some time off, spend it with the family, celebrate Christmas and New Year's. It was really nice to do that. I missed all of you, and so grateful to be back now. Let me just start with a thought on 2024. I did wake up yesterday, and this may be the first year in a very long time that I didn't stay up until midnight. And for those of you who are older than me, you may have figured this out years ago. I'm finally coming around to this. I just was like, no, I went to bed at a normal time because I know what happens at midnight. It's the same thing every year. It's midnight, and I'm really tired the next day. So I just went to bed. I was like, I'm going to bed. And I woke up the next day. I woke up yesterday feeling great. I said, I feel good. But then I had this realization. The only thing that hit me was not being tired. But holy cow, it's 2024. We're going into it. Now we're entering the big election year wherein the future of the country truly will be decided. Truly will be decided. And there are going to be a bunch of forces who are getting involved in this, not with good intent, but with ill intent for the future of our country. And we have to do everything we can to stop them. We really do. But looking at all of this, I'm looking at the calendar here. We're now less than 2 weeks away from the Iowa caucuses. Less than 2 weeks, January 15th, the Iowa caucuses. And then we begin, and then we're kind of off and running. And in the midst of all of this, I'm not a New Year's resolution guy because I feel like people who make the New Year's resolutions, like typically if you have to make a resolution, you're like, this year I'm going to do this. That's like you fail. You fail. You just got to make it a commitment. It's not a New Year's resolution. It's just I'm resolved to be better. That's the resolution. And one of the things I'm resolved about this year is no matter what the left throws at me, no matter what the left throws at us, we have to keep our head held high and confront it and not be defeated by it. Because there's going to be temptations. There always is, right? We saw a lot of it through the last year. You're looking at like the state of America's borders and our economy and all the stuff collapsing around you. And I don't recognize this country. What sort of country am I going to leave to my kids? And it's easy to put yourself into a cycle of depression and pessimism about the direction of our country. We watched as the midterms came and went, and the red wave, as promised, wasn't there. And you watched as the Virginia elections just took place, and you're like, not what I wanted. Didn't go the way I wanted. Didn't go the way I expected, right? And so you can't lull yourself into any sort of false, rose-colored glasses sense of optimism. Oh, it's going to be great this year no matter what. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm not going to do that myself. But you definitely have to soldier on with a sense of hope. And you definitely have to fight back when the opportunities present themselves. Any good father tells his sons, they don't start fights, but they finish them. So if you get punched, fight back. Fight back. And so I guess for all of us, it's to take inventory of how are we being affected, how is our family being affected, and what are we doing to stand up for them? And that should be kind of the, our animating principle with each passing day. It certainly is going to be for me. That's my goal this year. And not just this year, but for the rest of my life. What can I do for my kid? What can I do for my wife? What can I do for my family, my church, my community, my country? So I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good about 2024 in the sense that I'm looking around me and I know a lot. This line of work has been really a blessing to me because I've gotten to know so many patriots and so many people who really do care about the country and so many people who are working for its betterment. So let me give you an example today in the form of some breaking news. Today we're looking at the president of Harvard has just been loaded into a trebuchet and launched off campus. Well, not quite. She's still going to stick around, but she's done as the president. Claudine Gay, the woman who had that disastrous hearing before Congress, where she was asked by Elise Stefanik over and over, hey, would you condemn anti-Semitism? If you have people on campus calling for the genocide of Jews, does that violate your code of conduct? Well, it would depend on the context. And all of these presidents from these lunatic top universities in the United States of America, unfortunately, they all did the same dog and pony show. Well, it would depend on the context. If they were calling for genocide, we would have to know the context. Well, if they were calling for genocide, I think we have the context. I think we know what the context is. They're calling for genocide. Does it violate your code of conduct? I'm not saying they don't have free speech rights. They very well could. But if you have a code of conduct on campus, would it encompass their decision to say, hey, the Jewish students on this campus should be genocided? You would hope a code of conduct, should you have one, might encompass that. You know, you coach a basketball team or something, and you got one of the players on your team calling for the genocide of some of the other players on the basis of their religion or their race. Like, you might be like, hey, that's out of line. We're going to bench you. In fact, you're not even allowed at the games. The next 3 games, you're out. Hopefully by then you get the genocidal urges out of your system. I might be going a little easy on the genocidal kid, but the point is, yeah, there's a code of conduct. This should hit the tripwire, right? And so over a month ago, we saw it happen at the University of Pennsylvania. The University of Pennsylvania president, who gave similarly disastrous answers, Liz McGill, well, she was trebucheted. Goodbye from the University of Pennsylvania. They took her out of the role as the president of that institution. And the same today is true of Claudine Gay. The news of her departure as president, now she's still sticking around because this is how it works. It's all a big shell game. They move people around. They're like, oh, you're still a professor. Like in a face-saving exercise. And the truth is they're angry that they got any scrutiny whatsoever because the ruling class, and that includes the faculty and the leadership at Harvard, should never be subjected to the kind of scrutiny that Claudine Gay was subjected to. And you know why she was scrutinized. We'll get to that in a moment. So they're going to keep her around as a professor. But this comes as, this morning, the Washington Free Beacon had yet another report on how she was stealing other people's work. She's supposed to be the top person at an institution for scholarly achievement, Harvard, perhaps the top in the world. And the Free Beacon had a report this weekend. Harvard University president Claudine Gay was hit with 6 additional allegations of plagiarism on Monday, this would be yesterday, in a complaint filed with the university, breathing fresh life into a scandal that has embroiled her nascent presidency and pushing the total number of allegations near 50. 50 times you've been documented stealing other people's work? How did you become the president of Harvard? 7 of Gay's 17 published works have already been impacted by the scandal, but the new charges, which have not been previously reported, extend into an 8th. In a 2001 article, Gay lifts nearly half a page of material verbatim from another scholar, David Cannon, a political science professor at the University of Wisconsin. So she steals from this guy, David Cannon, at the University of Wisconsin. Now, it's funny, as I'm reading through this Free Beacon article today, Cannon, for his part, it's crystal clear. She is stealing all sorts of things from him. She's stealing the way he expresses ideas. She's stealing his footnotes. She's stealing. It's crystal clear. The Free Beacon lays them out side by side. And if you're a little slower, they help because they've got an animated a highlighter that goes over everything that this guy, Cannon, wrote and how Claudine Gay stole it from him. The highlighter compares all the text for you. So it's a very low-intensity effort to look at this and be like, wow, she stole everything. She stole all of this. So Cannon, the Free Beacon points this out because they reached Cannon, and they asked him about it. It says, Cannon, like several of the scholars Gay has quoted without attribution, insisted that she had done nothing wrong. Wait a second. The guy whose work was stolen insists that that's totally fine and she did nothing wrong? He said, quote, I'm not at all concerned about the passages, Cannon told the Washington Free Beacon. This isn't even close to an example of academic plagiarism. Really? Really? Let's see. Here's Cannon's original footnote. States in which less than 50% of the voting age population either registered or voted in the 1964 presidential election, and that had various discriminatory prerequisites for voting as of November 1st, 1964. All right, let me go over to Gay's writing. States in which less than 50% of the voting age population either registered or voted in the 1964 presidential election, and that in various discriminatory prerequisites for voting as of November 1st, 1964. Wait a second. That is, what do we say? Word for word, bar for bar, the same exact, all the way down to the punctuation. It's the same passage. Stolen from this guy. And he doesn't care. Now, I'm going to venture some guesses here. I'm going to make a guess because I haven't seen a picture of this dude, but I bet you he's a white liberal. I bet you he's a white liberal. That's a healthy guess. Would you Google this guy? David Cannon is his name with one. He's a white guy? Okay, so he's a white guy. We've confirmed. Thank you. Quick fact check in the studio. So, white guy, white liberal, we can, I think, safely assume. University of Wisconsin guy. And he says it's totally fine. Yeah, she can take this work. It's not theft. It's creative borrowing. And she's a black woman. And the last thing this guy wants to be on the record for is critiquing a black woman's decision to steal his stuff. For real. He thinks that way, and it's probably true in his circles. That way lies career suicide. Don't give them any ammunition. But okay, then why is she resigning today? Why is Claudine Gay resigning her post? And when someone says they resign from a high-profile position, usually they're actually being fired and given the opportunity to claim that they're resigning as a face-saving mechanism. Oh, I had the agency here. I resigned. And I don't know. I don't actually know what the truth is, but my assumption is that she was canned. Gay has released a letter today, an open letter, indicating that she is leaving, but that's it. Now, she does not offer a single reason. We just read this here in the last hour because that's when it came out. She hasn't given a single reason as to why she's resigning. Not a one. She says, "Dear members of the Harvard community, it is with a heavy heart but a deep love for Harvard that I write to share that I will be stepping down as president. This is not a decision I came to easily. Indeed, it has been difficult, beyond words." Maybe if you stole some from someone else, maybe you'll figure out a way to say it. "Beyond words, because I have looked forward to working with so many of you to advance the commitment to academic excellence that has propelled this great university across centuries. But after consultation with members of the corporation," that's the dystopian name for the board of Harvard, the corporation. Even she capitalized corporation. That's how creepy this whole thing is. "After consultation with members of the corporation, it has become clear that it is in the best interests of Harvard for me to resign so that our community can navigate this moment of extraordinary challenge with a focus on the institution rather than any individual." That's it. She never once says why she's resigning. Now, she goes on to talk about how it's been an honor and how it's been great to be connected to everyone at Harvard. And then she says this: "Amidst all of this, it has been distressing to have doubt cast on my commitments to confronting hate and to upholding scholarly rigor, two bedrock values that are fundamental to who I am." Oh, really? Because the public record suggests the complete opposite. Standing up to hate. So when people are calling for genocide on your campus and you say, well, it would depend on the context whether or not that violates the code of conduct. Yeah, you have a great track record standing up to hatred. Upholding scholarly rigor. How many documents have you stolen from to produce what is supposed to be your scholarly work? And then she goes and she says that's all fundamental to who she is. And quote, "And it's frightening to be subjected to personal attacks and threats fueled by racial animus." And there you have it. So in case you were wondering, would she blame racism on her ouster? Well, yeah. In fact, her very first statement on the subject is that she's being canned because of her race. Now, remember, she's the one who says, am I right about this, Corey? She said she resigned today, right? So if she resigned because of racism, what? She decided to get rid of herself because of racism? What does that have to do with anything? What is she even talking about? How was she the president of Harvard to begin with? Let me point out something else that should be obvious. Hopefully. The people she was stealing from have been black. How is it? So if you stand up for the scholars who actually did the work, right, like Dr. Carol Swain, who we had on this program, if you stand up for her, for Carol Swain, then you're trying to eject Claudine Gay because of racial animus? Make it make sense. It won't. It won't. Other than that she's wielding this as a shield, and she's hoping to silence any other scrutiny or criticism by virtue of her race. In fact, if you wanted to assess any of this through the lens of race, why is it that the University of Pennsylvania's Liz McGill, a white woman, was fired over a month ago, the beginning of December, and she was just fired in a brand new year? Claudine Gay was just fired in 2024. Perhaps her race was the shield that gave her an extra month. She was graded on a curve. And is that really what black professionals, black scholars, black academics want? They want an easier road. They want the ability to steal and not be fired. Like what? What are you even talking about? And of course, she's not the only one today. The left is very angry at this because this is where I was talking about, hey, if you can have people come out and fight back for our country, you can make good things happen. And boy, there are some real conservatives who were involved in this. There's just people, who just are fighting the good fight. Chris Rufo, man, how much did he expose this? Chris Rufo and Aaron Sibarium over at the Washington Free Beacon. These are people who actually did the journalism, exposed all of this, and in the truest sense, did something that improved the country today. Got the resignation of the president of Harvard, who has turned that institution, or has at least been a part of turning that institution, into a complete disaster for our country. All right. Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up today on the program, Alana Goodman will be with us. She wrote a book on the mysterious demise of Jeffrey Epstein, and now, of course, there's new Epstein documents being made public this week. Why does Bill Clinton's name appear so many times? Alana will join us to discuss. At 5 o'clock, Tony Schaefer is here. We talked to him about a hoax that was perpetrated about the American military. And then Philip Lenjicki joins us at 5:30. We'll talk about the Biden administration watering down the vetting process for illegal immigrants coming from China. Why would they do that? You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Last year, you may know, especially if you live in the D.C. area, which is, of course, in the sound of my voice, was a very violent year. Unfortunately, a very violent year in the nation's capital. It was the single deadliest year when it comes to homicides this millennium, this century. Everyone's pointing back. It's the deadliest it's been since 1997. It sure is. 274 different people. The Washington Post with a big piece on it this weekend. Confirmed victims ranging from infants to octogenarians. And they note that most of the death, or at least the burden for it, fell acutely on black residents in southeast Washington, D.C., especially east of the Anacostia River. So in other words, in a Democrat-run city, the bloodshed was hardest, hurt black D.C. residents the most. And this is a story that's been playing out for years under these Democrats, and it just keeps getting worse. For more on what to make of this and if we can break this cycle of violence, let's bring in Joe Pinion now. He's a GOP strategist, a former U.S. Senate candidate in New York, and he joins us on the phone. Joe, Happy New Year to you. Thank you for your time today, sir.
Happy New Year. Thanks so much for having me.
This is, again, I hate these headlines. It's unfortunate that we get them, and it seemed to wash over so many of us because they're so routine. But the left keeps on saying that they're the answer, but they kind of seem like they're the problem, given that they're in charge.
Well, the hard truth is that the path to power for the Democratic Party is often paved with the blood of black and brown communities. You talk about those statistics in D.C., they are abysmal, but they are not new. They are just reaching new peaks.
Yeah.
I'm from New York State. Rochester, New York, per capita has a higher murder rate than Chicago, Illinois. Again, a city that has a large majority of black families struggling with the ravages of poverty, the three-strand cord of despair, lack of educational outcomes, lack and a rise in poverty, and the crime that is the actual end result of those two deficiencies. So we have a lot of work to do. And yes, it's very easy to go to the black community and say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But we as Republicans, as conservatives who see this carnage that is happening on the watch of so many Democratic mayors and Democratic governors,
Yes.
have an obligation to also look in the mirror and say, we must actually do something differently too, to figure out how we can get our conservative message to penetrate those corridors where we have been unsuccessful thus far.
I want to drill down with you, if I can, Joe, on this issue of poverty and the role that it plays in any of this. In fact, Brandon Johnson is the mayor of Chicago and, of course, a Democrat, and they have a very violent city. And he was on CNN this weekend suggesting that the way out would be to cut checks to the black residents of Chicago. That would bring the crime rate down. Take a listen to his response.
I've added a $500,000 for restoration and reparations to address, again, the cycle of violence, which looks like school closings, closing of mental health facilities, of which I've invested in now. And so in order for us to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago, it requires investments. And that's what this budget has done.
He says reparations. That's, to most people, when you hear that, that means cutting checks to people. Why would giving people money reduce crime? Do you think that would actually work?
Well, it's not only would it not work, but we have a long legacy of seeing that just handing out blank checks to people who don't have the tools and the means to support themselves does not work. Look, I'm all for investments in communities. We have to invest in communities that have seen a deficiency in educational outcomes, in professional outcomes. But that's not what Democrats are talking about. What Democrats are talking about is pointing to the faceless enemy of yesterday to try to blind people to the reality that they are inflicting pain on communities today. And so that is unfortunately what the mayor of Chicago is talking about, putting a price tag on generations of despair to try to act as if somehow he is not responsible for the pain they're experiencing today. I mean, if you look at Chicago specifically, they signed a deal with a private company for the purposes of dealing with their actual parking on the streets. And guess what happened? They signed a deal that is a multi-decade deal for over $1 billion. The company has already made the $1 billion back, and there's close to 60 to 70 years left on the deal. So that is not a matter of a lack of investment in Chicago. That is gross mismanagement by people who are clearly unqualified to do the job. They left billions of dollars on the table that has actually had a disparate impact on the people that live there. And now, instead of dealing with the fact that you've got an open border on the southern border, a fentanyl crisis brought to us by Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer, who said it was a figment of our imagination, they're just going to continue to pretend that the people who have been here for about 24 hours deserve more than people whose families have been here going back to Jim Crow and beyond.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's just crazy. He's watching what happens every year, and you're like, man, some of the answers seem really obvious. And also, I get annoyed. You must be really annoyed by how patronizing the left is towards black Americans. Because, for instance, you know, this idea that, oh, well, we got to go easy on criminals because it disproportionately affects black people. We're like, wait a second. Go easy on criminals. So that means that criminals, no matter their skin color, they go back to the communities they're from, and then they hurt those communities. That means in this case that you have more black Americans being hurt by the criminals that they're going easy on. And that's been happening here in Washington, D.C. Muriel Bowser paints Black Lives Matter on the street leading up to the White House and thinks that's enough. But certainly now we have more black lives being lost each year.
Look, people who actually care about black lives don't have to paint it on the street to convince you. And as I have said time and time again, we see the comfort food for the masses, these slogans that come out from Democrats that try to hide the fact that they're not really doing much for black people today. You look at go down to Baltimore, Maryland. You've got close to, in many ways, 70% of the kids attending their high schools reading at an elementary school level. You come to New York City, 75% of black children that look like me cannot do math at grade level. All across this country, you're looking at close to 60% of all black children not being able to read at grade level. That is child abuse, brought to you by people who want you to be convinced that the greatest threat to the black community is an unnamed white supremacist lurking in the shadows. So these are not plans for growth. These are plans for Democrats to hold on to power. It is up to us of good conscience to go to these communities and say, your eyes are not lying to you. You should be sick and tired of being sick and tired. What you're experiencing is abnormal, and together we can paint a different picture.
Yeah, not being able to read is a sentence to struggle, isn't it? I mean, in terms of for the rest of your life, if you can't read by third grade, they say you are destined. Unfortunately, you're very likely to not even make it through high school. So by third grade, and that's critical.
It is the civil rights issue of our lifetime. And if you're talking about what happened in all of these switches in American history, Black people were a robust part of the Republican Party because the Republican Party was most critically involved in the issue of their time, freedom, literal freedom. And it is time now for the Republican Party to have that same level of aggression on the civil rights issue of the 21st century, which are the academic deficits that are a direct result of Democrats who want to point the finger at Republicans when in places like New York and Chicago and D.C., you cannot find an elected Republican anywhere. It is their policies that have left these children in a cocoon of fear, have turned the living room into a shooting gallery, have months where you go by and not a single person that is killed is not a Black person. So for every Black criminal they're trying to mitigate the outcomes for, there are more victims in this country than there are criminals. The handful of criminals need to deal with the accountability that they deserve, and we need to just continue to beat that drum to say that this was not the America that was promised. You cannot achieve justice by bringing injustice to people's front door.
Sure. And so, Joe Pinion, and thank you for being with us today, what role should the government play, if any, when it comes to bringing to an end, certainly, this violence on Black Americans? And helping sort of, get Black Americans on the right track, because that seems to be every year it seems like that's the same. We have the same conversation without seeing any positive traction, unfortunately.
Well, look, I think that on some basic level, it's political season, so it's the dream making season. So
right.
All of a sudden we talk about how many jobs were created. In the end, presidents don't create jobs. Government sets the conditions for Americans to chart their own destiny. When America works, it's because we are all getting at least some semblance of equal access to the opportunity that was promised.
Yeah.
That's how we get to that more perfect union. And so if you're talking about how you address deficiencies in Black communities and Hispanic communities and Latino communities, the issues are the same. It's simply saying we need to have school choice for every single child that calls this nation home. You should not be sentenced to being stuck in a failing school district just because of the color of your skin or the zip code in which you live. The problem is Democrats don't seem to agree. You should not be sentenced to a life of fear because of the zip code in which you live. The problem is Democrats want to defund the police. You should not be trapped in a cycle of doom where your teachers want you to view yourself as a victim because of what happened to your ancestors 200 years ago, when in all reality, what we should be focused on is making sure you can read today. So I think that is the approach. There are key issues that we can address. And yes, money is a huge part of it, but money with no plan that is wasted is in many ways more abusive than not spending the money. We spend more money today in the state of New York educating less kids for worse results, with a budget that has gone up nearly threefold in my lifetime. That is not a plan for success. That is the substance of failure that we need to end.
Also, why are we spending so much money to destroy Black families? What the hell is that about? We're straight up aborting Black children by the millions each decade using American taxpayer dollars to do it. How does that help Black families, Joe Pinion?
It really doesn't. And I always tell people, I say, look, we live in a free society. If you want to believe in being pro-choice, that is up to you. But the notion that we would listen to people who actually get on television and say that aborting Black children has led to greater economic prospects for the Black community writ large and view that as a positive thing, that is, from my perspective, bigotry of the highest order.
Yeah.
The notion that somehow the only way Black people can get ahead is for us to quite literally cancel tomorrow's promise before it arrives in the world. So I think that's how we have to start attacking these issues, that you should be able every political season to hold the people that represent you accountable. And what Democrats do every year, they have become professional hostage takers. They go to the Black mother and they say, we're not allowed to talk about the fact that your children can't read at grade level because the greatest threat to your life is a white supremacist that I cannot name. They go to the Hispanic community and they say we're not allowed to talk about the violence because there is a greater threat to the teachers' unions that we have to defend. A women's right to choose is more important. So we just need to tell people, you have the right to be mad. You have the right to demand better results. And any person that comes to you and says, we will talk about your problems tomorrow after they've had 40 years to deal with them is not a person you should trust.
All right, so one last piece, and maybe this is what you're talking about might be breaking through among some black Americans. There's a USA Today poll out today, USA Today Suffolk University poll. They say black and Hispanic young voters are abandoning Biden as the election year begins. Now, let's not confuse that with jumping to Trump, but it certainly seems that they say 1 in 5 black voters are now saying, that's a huge percentage, now say that they will support a third-party candidate in November. Donald Trump is now leading among Hispanic voters and young people, if you can believe it. And when 7 candidates are specified by name, Trump's lead inches up to 3 percentage points, 37 to 34. Independent Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is at the top of the third-party candidates with 10%. What do you make of this? What are black voters not seeing in Joe Biden that's leading them to abandon support for him?
Well, look, I think that we live in cycles in politics, and I think the hard truth for Democrats is that, as old Abraham Lincoln famously said, you can fool some of the people all of the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. And at some point, people realize that they have not received what they voted for. Democrats have made a lot of promises to a lot of very different groups. They've been able to unify those groups around the idea that any person with the R next to their name is somehow incarnate evil. And so now people are starting to wake up to the hard truth that it doesn't seem to matter how many times they vote for the Democrats. They never actually get the America that was promised on their watch. So I think that's the hard truth. People vote in one of two ways. They either go to the ballot box or they stay on their couch. Either way, when you look at the black community, which in many ways is what we call a captured constituency, it means that the majority of black votes end up going for one party. Every time a black voter stays home, unfortunately, that's a bad thing for the Democratic Party. For Republicans, we should be viewing that as an opportunity not to have them stay home for us to win, but to demonstrate that we are worthy of victory by vigorously pursuing their vote in the name of the issues that we all know have plagued these communities for far too long, because the Democrats who say they care really don't.
All right. Joe Pinion, Republican strategist, former U.S. Senate candidate in New York. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time today. Happy New Year to you. Yeah, big USA Today survey out today that Joe Biden is heading into the election year showing alarming weakness among stalwarts of the Democratic base. And when the USA Today says alarming, they mean alarming to the USA Today newsroom. It's alarming that Biden isn't doing well. Could you imagine them writing a similar piece about Donald Trump? Trump heads into 2024 with alarming weakness, right? Would you ever see that sentence published by USA Today? Of course not. Of course not. Donald Trump is now leading among Hispanic voters and young people. That's the surprise here. Young people prefer Trump. 1 in 5 black voters now say they'll support a third-party candidate in November, as I mentioned a moment ago. Biden's failure to consolidate support in key parts of the coalition that elected him in 2020 has left him narrowly trailing Trump, the likely Republican nominee, 39 to 37%. 17% indicate that they would support an unnamed third-party candidate. But then when they put everybody in by name, Trump is up by 3 percentage points, 37 to 34. So if I'm doing the math here, Trump drops from 39 to 37 with all of those third-party candidates listed, but Biden drops from 37 to 34. So Biden is losing more votes to third-party candidates than Trump is, in case you were wondering. There was quite a bit of hemming and hawing over the role that Robert Kennedy would play in this race. Well, Trump people like Robert Kennedy. They did, specifically related to his positions on the big pharmaceutical companies and the COVID jabs, all of that. But it turns out more people who would otherwise be inclined to vote for Biden will break for Robert F. Kennedy than Trump, than the people who support Trump now. The findings underscore the formidable political task the president faces this year to win a second term. There's a lot of hand-wringing going on. NBC News has a similar piece about this today, about the unexpected reasons that Joe Biden may not win this year. Could one of them be the voters don't like what they've been served? That doesn't appear in the piece. They never once float that theory. No, it's the typical stuff. The Russians might interfere again. What if voters just prefer the Trump era? things were so much better then. No, that couldn't possibly be why. Couldn't possibly be. Coming up here in the next hour, Alana Goodman is going to join us. We'll talk to her about all of those names set to pop out in public of people associated with Jeffrey Epstein and why Bill Clinton is expected to be all over that paperwork.